Alright, hello and welcome everyone. This is Gump and I'm here with my SMG Crit Build Guide version 2.0 that includes the new sets. I'm going to be giving you a number of different versions of that set today. One of those versions you can see in the video behind me. It's actually one of the lower DPS versions that I actually run. You can see 256,000 point headshots there, 107,000 crits. And you're going to see a 437,000 point headshot here in a second. We have a few different versions of this build, and we're going to go into my character sheet here in a character screen here in a minute. There's the 437,000 point headshot. We're going to go into my character screen here in a minute. We're going to look at this build, and then we're going to go take this out and go into the spreadsheet and actually look at all the numbers for each one of the versions of this. I also run a sniper rifle as a secondary. You can see I'm pulling 1.4 million point headshots against elites with armor on, and that's going to be the focus of this build, is focusing in on doing damage to elites while their armor is up. And this is an extreme damage build, at least around a million DPS and up over a million DPS, depending on what version of it you run. And so let's get into that now and go to the character screen, guys. Alright guys, I wanted to get through the character screen really fast so we can get to the spreadsheet and get into the numbers and get in depth about this thing and show you where you're getting your million DPS from. I'm going to give you this sheet a little bit later. It's going to be a thing to help you. It's kind of like a blueprint to the build to let you see exactly where to put what on each piece of gear so you can see what stats are the ones that you want and how I did mine. So this is the blueprint to follow of how to build this build. I'll give you a link for it soon to let you have a place to download it. So let's get into the game here and look real quickly at the current build I'm running. There are multiple versions that I could run of this thing. This is the 3-piece. I will explain all this in the spreadsheet. I run 3 Sentry and 3 Striker, and then sometimes when the scenario is right, I run 4 Sentry and 2 Striker. As you can see, it turns into a 4-2. And the only thing that changes when I switch these out as far as stats is I lose 50% critical hit damage from the 3-piece Striker, and then when I go back to the Sentry's Call, I pick up the marks, and you'll see, and I'm going to explain that here in a minute of why that's important and which one has a higher damage per second. All right, let's get in here and go look at the character real fast. I'm running 3,300 firearms. I show you in the spreadsheet coming up that once you get up to about 3,600 to 3,700 firearms, that this build turns into a million DPS against elites. Critical hit chance of 35%. You will notice later that 42% is the number that I'm actually shooting for, but I can't get to on my character right now. 199% critical hit damage, 164% headshot damage. If you haven't seen my video about how headshot damage is now calculated and how headshot damage is extremely OP in this game, and how I have 164% headshot damage, I have a video up for that. It's called Headshot Damage is OP. Imagine that. Alright, so I got some SMG damage on here. Damage to elites, 63%. Enemy armor damage, 54%. This is what we're stacking. Elite damage, armor damage, critical hit chance on an SMG. Skill power, it's 16,903 because I have skill power on my backpack. Max health, 67,440, almost 70k health here. I have a lower health version of this that hits up over a million DPS at 55, about 53, 54, 55,000 health depending on your gear scores. And armor mitigates 64.82. We're 0.18% under the cap, exactly where we want to be. We're not wasting any resources on our armor, but we're at the cap. And you can see some of the other stats, not so important. Abilities, I'm running the support station that gives back skill recovery and ammo, and I'm running pulse most of the time, and I'm usually running those 3 right there. Inside, let's go look at the game, my guns in the game, and we can see that I have the God Roll Vector with Brutal, Destructive, and Ferocious. I'm running 90% Extended Mag, Critical Hit Damage, Critical Hit Chance, Headshot Damage. None of these mods are level 32. Stability, Critical Hit Damage, Initial Bullet Stability. You can mess around with these with your own builds. A pretty decent sniper rifle drop, 44.6k damage modifier. Headshot damage is increased by 24%, critical hit damage over 26%, and headshots increase the weapon's signature skill resources by 11%. So I got some pretty good guns, and then I got an MK17 I roll in and out that gives me shouldering. And yeah, so was there anything else I was going to show you? So the only thing is that sometimes I switch out in my backpack. Sometimes I switch out this skill power here for an extra 20% critical hit damage, and I'm going to give you those numbers in the spreadsheet and let you see that. And as far as talents, guys, I am running 1 is none, and because I'm moving a lot and running and gunning, I'm getting 30. I'm using this on the move. I'm using triage to increase my skill cooldowns. One is none to increase my DPS, to increase my magazine size essentially, and strike back, which is to reach low health to reduce active skill cooldowns. So it's about getting to my cooldowns as fast as I can get them, and I'm always at low health and I'm always moving because I'm playing extremely aggressive with this build because it does so much DPS. So let's go in now to the spreadsheet and get into what we really want to be talking about, real DPS numbers. Alright guys, let's get into the meat of this thing and get into the spreadsheet numbers. For those of you that have followed me, you guys are used to seeing me use this, so we should be able to get through this a little faster. As you can see, I have multiple spreadsheets ready to roll. I've got a whole list of them up there, including armor elite damage, what happens when I turn my pulse on, how to get to 1 million DPS with 55,000 health, Sentry with no marks, Sentry with 1 mark, Sentry with 2 marks, Sentry with 3 marks, and we're going to see 1 million DPS with my current 67,000 health that I had in the game a minute ago. So this is right here the actual build that I am running right now. This is the one that I use in game the majority of the time. Now, like I said, I switch out in between this and Sentry, and I'm going to explain that here in just a minute about what I think I'm experiencing while I'm in game. So once again, damage versus elites, armor damage, critical hit damage, critical chance, and headshot damage are the things that we have stacked up here, and you'll see how these numbers start getting insane. Alright, so this is my base numbers. This is not against elites or anything. I have these are the exact numbers I just showed you guys in the game here. You can see them right down through here. We can go down and we can see that my DPS number is 343,590, even though the in-game calculator is giving me only 160,000 DPS. So we're blowing that out of the water. This number is the actual number, and it's a really good number for just our base number. But this build is built around doing damage to armor and elite, so it doesn't do it any justice to be looking at this 343,000 number. So let's go over and see what happens to our base damage number once we start adding in elite and armor damage, because that's where all of our stats are stacked. This brings our weapon damage, our base weapon damage number. Every time we hit an elite with armor on, we're going to be doing 27,110 damage. Their armor makes up about 80% of their damage, so that means, or their health, that means that we're going to be doing this 80% of the time pretty much. But I've gotten to the point where that's the only thing I care about, because once you get that armor off, even if the rest of your team doesn't do good DPS, you're just going to burn them down anyway. So getting the armor off is the most important thing to me. It's the only thing that I focus in on anymore for PvE. And, you know, I think it's a good strategy. So let's go down and look. Same exact stats. If you notice, the only thing difference is I've increased the bonus crit damage, and that's because what I showed you guys on the backpack having the 5600 skill power. I know a lot of people are going to be wanting to use the critical damage. It does give you more DPS than running the skill power, but I like the utility of the skill power to be able to have better heals. It gives me a little more survivability, and if I want to switch out my skills, it allows me to do different things and do them at a better rate and higher numbers for heals and other DPS things like smart cover and different things like that. I do have a thing showing you what happens when my pulse is up, given my pulse numbers right now. So we can go down and, like I said, everything here is the exact same thing as this over here, besides we've just changed out skill power on our backpack. And we can go down, and this is the numbers that you were seeing in game. It's 900,000 DPS is what you were seeing in the game. Now, I told you I was going to give you 1 million DPS, and I'm going to, I promise. But this is the numbers that I'm using in the game. This is a 3-3 Sentry and Striker combo that I'm working together, and it includes 1 is none talent, okay? Alright, so let's move up here and see what the pulse, what it does once we get pulse up. Obviously, that increases our crit chance and our crit damage. Those are the only two numbers that we changed here. Everything else is exactly the same as the previous page. And we can see our crit damage gets up closer to 60% at this point, and our crit damage rises to 274%. And if we come down, this is where we start realizing how crazy this is, because with 17,000 skill power, that's one of the reasons I like the skill power thing. I get the cooldown faster on the skill power. I run the ammo pack that gives me the skill recovery, and it comes back faster. So everything's coming back faster. I'm kind of relying on pulse a lot. But either way, I have it up a lot, and you can see me running by myself with as a solo player, 1,322,000 DPS against elites with armor on. You can see that the crit headshots climb to about 270,000 or so. Those are the same similar type of numbers that you were seeing when I was playing the video and things. Obviously, once we start playing with other players on our team, we can even bump this up even more. We also saw that, I was running with 70,000 health around 70,000 health. I still don't have a number of 240 pieces, so we could get higher with health and higher with damage too. About 3,300 firearms, I think, is what I had. I've seen this thing with 3,700 firearms, and that's what we're getting ready to look at now. So if we bump up our firearms to about 3,600 to 3,700 for my weapon, I have 10,800 damage weapon. That allows me to get 11,400 for my base weapon damage. So if we go back over here, this number 10,800 actually goes up to 11,400. And then once we stack that on top of our elites and stuff, we get to 28,616. And I usually have about 55 or 56,000 health in that scenario. Now, I don't like to be that glassy because I play solo a lot, and I do small group stuff where I run 2 men through missions. If I was a DPS player for a team, I would be fine with running 55k health if I had really good healer on the team or something. But either way, if you really want to go a little bit more glassy and you want to hit 1,000,000 DPS with a 3-3 build, then you can do that by increasing your firearms to about 36 or 3,700, which will give you this number, and you can see that everything's about the same. One of the things I changed out here is I took off SMG damage, because I have SMG damage on my gloves. You guys will you guys may have saw that in there. You actually don't want that. I'll show you the exact things you want on your gear sets here in just a second. But we're going to increase. I actually don't have a perfect build, is my point. So I have 35% crit chance. With a perfect build is what I'm going to give you guys on the sheet. You're going to have 42% chance to crit. Instead of 35, you're going to have a 219. The rest of the numbers are the same. Just the crit chance has changed. And our weapon damage has changed because we've increased our firearms. That brings our base DPS without pulse to 1 million, almost flat, almost exactly 1 million DPS, and that's carrying 55,000 health against damage versus elites and with their armor up. So one of the things that, let's go look at the Sentry right quick, and then I'm going to start explaining this. So this is when I switch over to 4-piece Sentry. If I have the exact same gear sets on, everything else is the same, and all I do is change out that holster. And if I could keep my firearms, right now my firearms and stuff drop, but if my firearms and everything stayed the same, what happens when we switch from 3-3 to Sentry, and which one is better? So if we go down, we can see that the damage that I deal per second is 800,000, and the reason that drops so dramatically, and you can see these numbers are all the same. The only thing that changed is our crit damage, because we lost 50% crit damage from our, actually this number is not even that high if we're comparing it. Well, let's just leave it like it is. This is comparing it to a 2.19 Sentry with no marks. Here we go. This is comparing it to the 2.19, this one. So this is the exact same numbers here. And you can see that the crit damage drops off. That's the only change in the entire build, is we lose 50% crit damage. And before we have any marks put on our target, our damage is 800,000. Now, if we go back and look over here, the 3-3 build actually does 900,000. So it's 100,000 more DPS before a mark gets put on, if between the 3-3 and the Sentry with no marks. And this is exactly what I'm experiencing in game. And now you're going to start understanding why I run a 3-3 piece sometimes and why I run a Sentry 4-piece sometimes. So let's start looking at what happens once we put our mark on. So at first we're doing 800k DPS. With the current build against elites. We're doing our base damage numbers. You see it's the same. I promise you it's all the same. Alright, so then we put on one mark and we move our weapon damage from 27,110. Our base weapon damage procs to 31,177. Now keep in mind, this is after we land the first headshot. So we land the first headshot and then this number starts appearing all of a sudden. Okay? And it stays here for 10 seconds unless we pop another mark. Okay? So we're going to go down, and I did a Sentry set review, and you kind of heard some of this talk in that. I didn't really get into depth about what I'm talking about right now, but if you haven't watched my Sentry review, go watch it. So we move our number up to 31,077, whatever that says there, 31,177. Same numbers all the way down through here, and now you can see that our DPS has actually climbed to 929,616. So at this point, once you put the first mark on there, you have officially at that point after started outdoing the 3-3 set. Now, let's keep going before I really start getting into that, because that's the thing that I'm going to dwell on here and try to make a point of, and maybe talk you guys into not running Sentry the entire time you're playing with it. Alright, so Once we get our second mark on, so we've hit 2 headshots in a row and now we're still shooting, and these are the new numbers we're going to pull. It's going to increase our damage up to 35,000. If you don't know why that's more than 15%, you need to go watch my video for the review of that. These marks actually do more than 15% each time you do them. The first mark does around 15 to 18%. The next mark's more around 20, and you end up with more of a 52% increase than a 45% increase, as I stated in the previous video that I did about the Sentry set. So we're up to 35,000 after the second mark, and we're up over 1 million DPS at that point, and everything else is still the same, just like we did before. We're up over 1 million DPS once again against the elites with armor on. Okay, and then we're going to see where this set really shines, and that is when you get this third mark. Our base weapon damage against an elite at that point is 41,000. So if we just hit them in the chest with no crit, it's 41,000 damage. If we hit them with a crit that's a non-headshot, it's 109,000 damage. When you crit with a headshot, it's 288,579 crit non-headshots. No pulses up or anything. This is just base numbers, okay? And this is when it really starts to shine, because then you get up to 1.2 million damage, okay? Now, here's the problem that I've been running into, and here's why I run 3 and 3 some of the time, and I run 4-piece Sentry some of the time. As you can see, this number over here doesn't change. After the first headshot, we do 900,000 DPS. After the second headshot, we do 900,000 DPS. If we're not doing headshots, we do 900,000 DPS. You know what I mean. If we're doing on average what we do, we're getting 900,000 DPS. It's a flat damage buff that you're giving yourself when you do 3 and 3, because we get 50% critical damage, and we're doing numbers that just add up like easily. Once we get over here, this is where I was saying in the previous video, once we start doing Sentry, we start seeing some variation in our numbers. It depends on how fast we get our marks. It depends on how many marks are on a target. Everything starts changing. So, without a doubt, it is definitely better DPS to run 4 Sentry than it is 3 and 3 over the long run. But what you'll notice is the burst DPS is actually much lower over here versus the Sentry versus the 3 and 3. The 3 and 3 does almost 1.3 million burst damage. With the Sentry with no marks, the number is like 1.1. That's a pretty considerable difference. Here's another huge difference. 189,000 point headshots here without the markup, and then over here we're looking at 228,000. 900,000 DPS here. Sentry with no marks, we're looking at 800,000 DPS. These are some considerably different numbers, and what I'm experiencing in game is this. When I'm going through challenging missions, I'm killing stuff so fast that I don't ever get to the 3rd Sentry mark. So these numbers over here that are really going to be great when we have some targets that are really high health, this is definitely the set that I'm going to run when I run incursions. Without a doubt, it is the best thing I can run against level 34 characters, which is what I think there are in incursions. But when I'm running challenging missions, I'm running this set. I'm running 3 and 3 because everything is dying before I ever get to 2 marks and 3 marks. And I don't ever surpass this I don't surpass the DPS that I do on 3 and 3 at 900k, which could be closer to 1 million, you know, like I showed you guys if I change some stuff up. But with Pulse up, my burst DPS is 1.89 million with my 3 and 3. And that's what you guys were seeing in the video that I started you off with, where you were seeing some of the stuff that was going on with 400,000 point headshots. That's where I'm getting buffs from teammates and stuff. And so we're just destroying things at this point in this game because it doesn't have enough health. And since this is a time-based thing and you have to get these marks up, sometimes you're not going to be able to get all 3 of them up. It sounds easy to hit them in the head 3 times in a row, but it may not be, you know, it may not happen as early as you think it's going to. A lot of times you aim center chest, like I talked about in the last video, and the recoil comes up into the head. So there's a number of things going on there with that, and that's what I'm doing. So I suggest that when they have higher level content, that you run Sentry without a doubt. It is definitely the best DPS versus 3 and 3, or versus the 3 and 3 that I run with Sentry and Striker together. But if you have lower damage targets that are elites, like in challenging missions right now, what I'm noticing is that the higher burst damage initially, just getting that just flat damage out right then instead of having to build it up slowly, and that's exactly what the striker set does too. The striker set starts building its damage up. This thing starts off ahead of Sentry and Striker, and then the longer the health the target has, the more health the target has, and the longer it takes for you to kill it, those sets start catching up to the 3 and 3. But so in challenging missions, I don't think there's anything that you can run better than this 3 and 3 piece. This is the same thing that I was hitting 1.4 million headshots with. That does mean that if there was more damage on targets, that once we got to 3 marks, I'd be getting even more damage than the 1.4 million. That means I'd be doing even more than 437,000 point headshots when I'm buffed. That means I'd be doing even more than 270,000 point headshots normally. So that gives you an idea of how I'm working my build. And let me go in here right quick. And don't want to go too much further here. And I want to give you guys the sheet here. And we're going to be looking at exactly what you want to do on each piece of gear. This isn't exactly what I had on my build just now. Like I said, I don't have a perfect build yet. But this is exactly the build that I'm working towards. Mask, damage versus elites, and enemy armor damages are a must. The body armor piece, damage versus elites, an extra mod slot, and you want armor, and you also want ammo capacity if you can get it. Backpack, you have an option. This is where I have the option between critical hit damage and skill power, and then your armor on it too. And then you want crit chance. You definitely want these 3 things on your SMG builds, guys. You want damage versus elites, critical hit damage, and crit chance. You do not want SMG damage. Damage versus elites is a higher buff than SMG damage, and so is crit chance. Those things are almost exactly the same. And the reason we end up going for it on our mask is because the mask is only 5% crit chance. The gloves are 7% crit chance. This is something I learned recently. And the 12% damage versus elites is almost the same exact thing as 7% crit chance once you get up to around 200% increased critical hit damage. Okay, so on our knee pads, we're going to be running crit damage, and we're going to be running damage versus elites and enemy armor damage. Those are a must. All of the yellow marks on here are optional minors. You can choose between any of those minors that I clicked. And then on our holsters, we want to run 3 stats, and we're going to run armor. And I don't know if I showed it to you, but this build has exactly 64.8% armor mitigation, so you can tell that I've really fine-tuned this thing. So we're exactly under the cap. There's no armor wasted at all on this build. It gets you at the 65% armor cap. It lets you do 1,000,000 DPS, and it gives you some real versatility between burst DPS and some better long-run DPS with your Sentry build, and absolutely destroys elite enemies. And I'll leave the clip that I had at the beginning of this video on at the end of this video right after this, and you guys can watch through that and see some of the crazy numbers, and then all of it's going to kind of make sense to you. And keep in mind that I am running the 3 and 3 build with 70,000 health and the skill power instead of the critical damage, so you can get your damage higher than that. So here you go, guys, a multitude of 1,000,000 DPS builds that you can run. And then the build that I'm running, which has more utility and a little bit more survivability to it, that is 900,000 DPS. All right, there you go, guys. Take it easy. It's Gump. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave any questions you have. And don't forget to subscribe. I'll be doing my new LMG tank heal build soon. And then we'll be doing a DPS sticky bomb build using tacticians. Actually, the next two of the next builds are going to be tactician builds. And I'll also be doing the striker review next. And I'm going to be talking about why I didn't do striker for this SMG build. I know that's going to be a big question, and I'm going to explain to you some of the problems with that build, with that set versus these sets. All right, take it easy, guys. It's Gump. I hope I didn't take too much of your time up. I hope you enjoyed it.